Welcome to The Real Demers, where we champion cinematic redemption for the B-sides, the offbeat, and the overlooked. We've worked in and around Hollywood, so we know just how hard it is to get movies made, and this is our space to celebrate cinematic misfits that we hope that you'll enjoy as much as we do. Okay, fun fact for the day about our show. We love Spike Lee. Any opportunity to discuss Spike Lee is gladly welcomed, and he has a new movie coming out called Highest to Lowest. Since Highest to Lowest is a remake of the Akira Kurosawa film High and Low, today we're exploring another of Lee's remakes, a 2015 adaptation of the art house vampire flick Ganja Hess. Buckle up, bloodsuckers and vampire hunters. We're doing a deep dive into the sweet blood of Jesus. I'm one of your hosts, Greg Bellavia, and I'm here with
Andres Anglade.
Andreas. What got you into Spike Lee, and what are some of your favorites off the top of your head?
You know, I was trying to remember the very first Spike Lee film I saw. I do remember the first one I saw in theaters was Summer of Sam. And I went to the theater with my dad to see that. I got to know Spike Lee because of my interest in Martin Scorsese. Them being very New York-centric filmmakers and learning about filmmaking through looking at Scorsese projects, you were obviously going to come across Spike Lee films as well.
Yep.
Black Klansman, He Got Game, Do the Right Thing. I'm a huge fan. I don't use the word masterpiece a lot for films. Malcolm X to me is a masterpiece. It's one of the greatest films ever made. I'm not a huge biopic fan, but if anyone ever asks me for biopic recommendations, that's the first title that comes out of my mouth. What I love about Spike Lee is how broad of a spectrum his films cover. You know, he has his own distinct identity as a filmmaker, and you know you're watching a Spike Lee film, but he covers so many different genres. And his common themes explore racial injustice, Black identity, and pride and gentrification. But his genius stems from being able to mix those into the various styles of film. For example, Inside Man. Phenomenal film.
Yep.
Amazing film. But that, handled by any other director, might have just been a straightforward heist thriller. But by inserting his personal touches, Lee elevates it to a level that goes beyond just the crime. You know, he also explores the racial politics with all races, the class politics at play with blue collar versus the mega rich. Jodie Foster's character is essentially a quote-unquote detective for the elite, and Denzel is the blue-collar version. You have that dichotomy at play, and I just love how varied his films are. There are no two Spike Lee films alike, at least of the ones that I've seen. And again, his style is all over each one. And another major theme is his love for New York. I already said he's a New York-centric filmmaker, but he loves to display the melting pot that is New York City, and he doesn't shy away from the joys and the horrors that brings. I distinctly remember watching 25th Hour in the theater and how shocking it was to see the opening credits over the massive searchlights that were erected at Ground Zero to emulate the Twin Towers. And also how Barry Pepper's, his character's apartment had a window view of Ground Zero. And a lot of us, you know, who were in New York, we were still grappling with how to handle 9/11. And I think this was the first film that really put it out there. And that's what Spike Lee does. He doesn't shy away from those things. What about you? When was your first experience with Spike?
You know, I think I lucked out back when the Independent Film Channel played independent films. No shots fired, Independent Film Channel, but it'd be nice to go back to that. They played She's Gotta Have It. I believe they also played Do the Right Thing. I definitely caught that on cable, so I think that was both of them. He's always been a very vibrant filmmaker, and I was struck by both of those. And Do the Right Thing is like a masterpiece. You don't need us to kind of go over that, but like, unfortunately or fortunately, the immediacy of that film still holds up today. Like, unfortunately, like the themes of it still hold true, but also it still can speak to today, which is the power of the movie. He's somebody that's always interesting. Like Malcolm X, classic. Inside Man, fantastic. Even his B-sides are interesting. And those are some of my favorite artists, like filmmakers or writers or anything, where you want to dive in, even if something doesn't work 100%. Even like, I'd say second tier stuff, maybe stuff that doesn't get as much play. He's interesting from top to bottom. And that doesn't mean that I necessarily think everything works. But even if something doesn't work, it doesn't work in like a fascinating way. Probably the one I've seen the most, actually, honestly, Clockers. I mean, I love crime movies. I went through a weird Harvey Keitel phase. Maybe it's not weird. He's awesome. But I was tracking down all his things. And I remember renting that VHS and watching it on like a loop. I do think that's a great movie, but I don't necessarily think that's a Spike Lee movie that people are talking about
No.
all the time. But I love his handling of kind of like a police procedural, and you kind of examine like the soul of this neighborhood and the different characters in it. I'm a huge fan of that one. Girl Six, I think that's maybe one of the more underappreciated ones. At the time, it kind of came and went, but I think it's got a fascinating screenplay, and what it's trying to tackle, I think still holds true for like women in the industry. If anything, I think like that one's a little bit ahead of its time. That one kind of came and went. And
I haven't seen that one. That one and Bamboozled are on my watch list, and I really, really want to watch them.
we might need to have some kind of follow-up discussion on Bamboozled, because that is one that I felt had good intentions that I felt one way about when I watched it, and then watching again more recently, I had very different feelings. And coming in cold, I'm curious how that would strike you. I'm curious how the film would come across.
You mentioned Clockers, and Clockers is an amazing film. I think that might be my introduction because that film was produced by Scorsese. And I'm wondering if, in the time that I was following film magazines and the entertainment media, they were making a big deal about Scorsese's involvement in Clockers. I think it might be Clockers. Yeah. And it's funny, last year I tried to make it a personal point to watch as many Spielberg films that I hadn't seen to get through the filmography. And I started that with Spike Lee this year. So I've gotten through a good amount, but there's just so many. He makes so many incredible films. And I love it because there's an article I came across written by Ed Guerrero, who is a professor of cinema studies at NYU. And he wrote, in the creativity, craft, and process of filmmaking itself, Spike Lee has become a signature American filmmaker with what has turned out to be, while largely Black inspired and focused, a broad, heterogeneous social vision. However inspired by African American culture and politics Lee's films turn out to be, his productivity has resulted in a significant number of films visualizing cultural politics of America as a whole. And I thought that was a great summation of Lee as a filmmaker, and further illustrates that there are not a lot of filmmakers still doing that today.
Yep. Still vibrant, and I feel like, able to still make commercial stuff, which I think is going to be part of our conversation today about, like, he has a big movie coming out with a big time star. Not everybody has that at kind of that level, and people are scrambling to find funding and stuff. And again, funding is going to also be part of today's episode, one of the subplots.
Some consider him a controversial figure, with the themes and politics he explores in his films and how vocal he is in the media. And I'm like, good. We need people like him to push back against the system. And even
also, just like an artist with a perspective. The perspective
right.
doesn't have to match mine. I mean, I just people out there just telling stories that are different than my own. Like, I want to hear that.
And that's what art is all about. In terms of pushing back the system, there's a line in The Sweet Blood of Jesus where Lafayette says, I'm totally dependent on this system. When that fails me, I set out to find another system in which I can't exist. That might also be a bit of a response to the Kickstarter, which we can get into later.
Yes.
But I wanted to ask you, I haven't seen the original Ganja Hess, but do you know, is that line in the original?
That line is not in the original.
Okay. Either way, no matter what you think of Spike Lee, there's no denying his important contributions to American filmmaking. And there was a Reddit Ask Me Anything thread that he did, and someone asked, do you ever look back and think that on occasion your mouth might have gotten ahead of your thinking? Do you look back at any particular public statements with regret? And his response was, yeah, I'm human.
Oh, I love it.
It's amazing.
Now, if you're listening to this, you might be wondering, okay, you guys are thinking about remakes. Well, what about Old Boy? That's pretty infamous, and that's true. But Lee viewed that movie as compromised, and we wanted to cover something off the beaten track. I mean, even talking to other like film loving friends, they were not familiar with this one, and I love that. Something really obscure. And B, he had total control over that. We'll get in again. There's a Kickstarter, and just we wanted to see what something that was 100% undiluted Spike Lee at this time period would look like. But what we also thought would be interesting is approaching The Sweet Blood of Jesus with only one of us having seen the original and the other one coming in cold, because neither one of us had seen this film, and we weren't sure what context would come with Ganja and Hess, and just kind of what we discover there. So just as we kind of go in, I have seen the source material. Andreas has not.
I have not.
So just to give a little context on Ganja and Hess and kind of where we're coming in with that, something I love about watching movies, studying movies, talking about movies with friends is it's this giant, wonderful onion. And as you peel back the layers, you keep finding more influences and inspiration. And there would be no De Sweet Blood of Jesus without Ganja Hess. And there would be no Ganja Hess without writer and director Bill Gunn. Let's take a time machine back to the 70s. We're following the success at the box office of blaxploitation films, crime films, horror films, and Gunn was approached to write and direct a quote unquote black vampire movie. So his backers essentially wanted another Blackula. All right, box office success. We get it. Okay, why Gunn? Gunn was a playwright, a novelist, a screenwriter, and had directed one movie that was unreleased entitled Stop. And to this day, I don't think Stop's ever had an official release. I think you can find it in like bootleg prints, but with all of this rediscovery going on, it's interesting that one hasn't been like fully claimed, but it's out there. But
have you seen that one?
I have not seen that one, okay. But maybe we will tackle that in the future. We'll see. But you can see the thought process the producers have. Hire an established creative and try and cash in on a craze. The problem is they hired an artist to do a genre filmmaker's job. And that's not a shot at genre filmmaking. We love all that stuff. Yeah. But if you want Blackula, that's not Gunn's wheelhouse. So to kind of illustrate that, here's a Wikipedia description of Gunn's play, The Black Picture Show. So this is what the play's about. Alexander is trying to create artwork that is both politically and artistically meaningful, while also being commercially successful. His son JD is focused on making bold, unconventional art. The way the play is structured also explores the challenge Black artists face in deciding whether to make experimental or mainstream work. That's Ganja Hess. This was Gunn's dilemma here. He did not want to churn something out with blood and guts and TNA. He didn't want to make something cheap. He wanted to make something that said something. And again, that's not a shot at blaxploitation filmmaking. I just think there was a certain vibe the producers were going for that might lean into campiness, that might lean into silliness, that might lean into popcorn entertainment. That is not what Gunn wanted. So he agreed, basically somebody's offering you the chance and funding to make a film. Who are you as an artist to say no to that? But he wanted to use vampirism as a launch pad to tackle addiction. So he wrote a screenplay that they signed off on, and hopefully to him would kind of straddle art and commerce. Okay, so that film would go on to become a revered cult item, and Gunn would be championed by Spike Lee and other creatives. And I kind of want to hold off on the particulars of that film and what happened with its release so we can focus on Sweet Blood of Jesus. But just setting the table, this was a passion project from filmmaker Bill Gunn that Spike Lee was a fan of. And when the opportunity arose, this is kind of what inspired him. And so what did you kind of find in your research about how this project came about?
So as many people know, Spike Lee is a professor of film at NYU. And he came across Kickstarter through his students who were using the platform to fund their thesis projects. And his students also told him about how Veronica Mars and Zach Braff projects had raised millions. So Spike Lee felt that the Kickstarter platform would be a good opportunity to fund a film without studio interference. The Kickstarter went live in 2014, and the description read, "The newest, hottest Spike Lee joint. Human beings who are addicted to blood, funny, sexy, and bloody. A new kind of love story, parentheses, and not a remake of Blackula." The entire film was crowdfunded. It was asking for $1,250,000 and raised $1.4 million. It offered a massive amount of rewards like signed DVDs, posters, and signed jerseys. What many people probably remember about that time that this Kickstarter was live is that it received a good amount of blowback, raising the question of why is a well-known, well-established director using the platform to fund his film? People see Kickstarter as more of a platform for those super independent filmmakers who are not big names and really need the money. That aspect never bothered me. It's like when people complain about actors or athletes getting massive paydays, like $20 million per picture. If that was you and someone was willing to pay you that amount, are you going to turn that down?
Yep.
Oh, you would?
No. Oh, no.
Because I wouldn't.
I am agreeing with you. No, I'm with you.
Obviously, a Kickstarter isn't a one-to-one comparison to that, but it's along those lines. I don't think he was doing this with ill intentions. Looking it over, there was a moment for a quick second where I considered the possibility of it being some sort of thought experiment, like, hey, let's see what we can do. Spike Lee even answers some of the concerns in the Kickstarter page himself. This is the list of the 4 questions he answered. Were you familiar with this or no?
I did see this before, but I think this is great context.
Yeah. So question number 1, why are you on Kickstarter? You're an established wealthy filmmaker. Question number 2, you have never backed anyone on Kickstarter, so why should we expect you to support us? Question number 3, Spike, you on Kickstarter is hurting the young filmmakers. Question 4, why are you not more forthcoming on the details of your Kickstarter project? For the first question, He does mention the infamous story of how he needed help finding the last of the funds to make Malcolm X, and he made several phone calls to prominent black leaders and entertainers to get the money. He called it Kickstarter before there even was a Kickstarter. Doing the Kickstarter is a way to have his fans being more involved and contribute. You know, it's never easy calling someone to borrow money. Also, in the Kickstarter video, he does mention he wants to make something without studio interference. And a fully independently funded film means no studio can get involved, and that gives you a massive amount of freedom. You're free to make the exact movie that you want to make. No notes from studio execs or executive producers that you might not agree with, whether that's good or bad.
Yep.
You also have the freedom when it's not your money and there's no obligation to pay it back. Sure, you have to fulfill the Kickstarter rewards, but without that cloud of financial debt hanging over you, it's very freeing. There's hundreds of stories of filmmakers putting their films on credit cards, borrowing money from family and friends. I mean, I did that for most of my projects. Mm-hmm. So why not use a crowdfunding platform for your advantage?
I get it. I understand where he's coming from. And also, I don't see Spike Lee living in a mansion. I don't see Spike Lee driving around in a spaceship. I see somebody who's like he's a well-established filmmaker, but it's not like he's oozing money all the time. So I get a pushback. I get there's somebody established. This person can't get stuff made. Look where we are now. Look what Coppola did with Megalopolis. I mean, just I feel like if you want it to be an artistic project or something that's a little bit offbeat, you almost have to kind of hustle a little bit. So if the Kickstarter's still live, you can not to contribute, but you can go back and kind of read up on it. That's all I mean by that. Yeah. And I think he sums it up very well. And I totally get it. Also, at this point in his career, you know, he self-funded Red Hook Summer, something that he is happy to point out. So it's not like he hadn't done that. And this is just a tool. And if people didn't want, he doesn't have a gun to your head. If you don't want to contribute, don't contribute. I love Brian De Palma, who's getting on in years. I don't know how many De Palma movies we're gonna get at this point. If Brian De Palma tried to crowdfund a project, I would absolutely contribute to that.
Agreed. And like I said earlier, he found out about this from his students. So to him, it was just a new, like you said, another tool to use. Instead of putting in your own money, why not try it? Why not see if you can kickstart? I never understood the blowback for it. And like I said earlier, the line by Lafayette in The Sweet Blooded Jesus mentions how he wants to find another system in which I can't exist. Maybe that's Spike responding to the Kickstarter detractors. Sure.
I think there's this thought by some folks that anybody that's in the industry is just swimming in money, and that's just not how. Hey, I wish that's how it is, but that's
we both know that's not true.
Yeah.
I did want to highlight the fourth question, which why are you not more forthcoming on the details of your Kickstarter project? And I'm going to read his answer to that. The reason I have not disclosed more info on the story is because it's a thriller. In order for a film of this type to work, the less details, the better for this film to work with the audience. They can't know a whole lot before they sit down in a theater to see it. Yeah, I know. I'm asking for backers for a film they don't know a lot about. My answer to that is trust me. I hope you have seen some things over the past 3 decades making films that can earn your trust. Now, Greg, nowhere on the Kickstarter does it mention that it's a remake of Ganja and Hess.
That is fascinating to me.
And yeah, I'm wondering if he did it as a surprise. Like maybe he was like, I'm going to surprise people that it's a remake, or he didn't want any criticism about it being a remake. Right? Maybe he didn't want to say it's a remake of Ganja and Hess, and then suddenly people turn on him for remaking that film.
Yeah, I feel like you're onto something there. Not to say like we're going to get into the movie itself and our thoughts of the movie, but like in terms of approaching the movie, that's very interesting.
The description that I read earlier added that it's not a remake of Blackula. So I have to imagine that there was some speculation that it was a remake of something. Did you come across anything like in your research?
Again, okay, full disclosure, everybody. We're recording this in 2025. Maybe this was out and about, just in our going back and looking up the project. Just something that jumped out on that Kickstarter page. Was it not like the headline, this is a remake of Ganja and Hess? So just, I don't know how exactly it was being portrayed. Maybe there were interviews, maybe that's not. And again, that's not right or wrong. It's just interesting looking at the primary form of fundraising that wasn't like the first thing you see. It's that kind of what Andreas just said. There's a level of trust me. And I think if you're a Spike Lee fan, you would trust him. And again, I think he brought you back a Spike Lee. I'm not saying there's anything wrong or nefarious by it. It's just interesting that the Ganja and Hess connection wasn't front and center. That's all I mean by it.
It's almost like you might want to use that as a way to get people excited, but I could also understand that there are the people who wouldn't want it remade. right? And he wants to step around any criticisms to people not wanting that.
That's interesting about remakes in general, because him being the director of an Old Boy remake, that never sat right with me. Not that it's wrong, but it's just that's such a singular vision. And also the South Korean style of storytelling is very different than American. So trying to adapt that style, I just wasn't sure what that was going to look like. On the other hand, Highest to Lowest, I think he's a great choice because it's about class problems. It's about, race problems. It's about like there's a whole bunch of like society ills that you can kind of like really dig into that's present in the Kurosawa movie. I think he's going to do a great job. So this is an example of going in, oh, he's adapting a cult item from a revered black filmmaker. Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting project. So I think if that leaked, I wouldn't have the Old Boy response. I'd have the Highest to Lowest response, where I was like, yeah, bring it on. Let's do it.
And what's interesting is that Old Boy came out around the same time that this campaign was happening. Maybe he got bit by the remake bug.
That's a really good point. Two almost back to back. Red Hook Summer was hanging out around there, but like Spike Lee's also had 9 lives. I mean, like there's times where his career's been super high. There's times where it's dipped. And I had a friend a couple of years ago who wasn't sure if they were going to kind of get back up. And I was like, never count him out. He's always one film. And then Black Klansman, The Five Bloods, boom, we're back. And now it's like, I just saw a movie the other day in the theater. Highest to Lowest was one of the 4 trailers beforehand. But at that point, I hate to say dip, but that wasn't the most like financially successful period of his career was right there. So I get it. I get maybe there was a level of, I don't want to just be known as the remake guy.
The last thing I want to mention about the Kickstarter is the most prominent update on the campaign page says, added a great talent to our 2 stellar leads, Mr. Michael K. Williams. The late Michael K. Williams, RIP, is a phenomenal actor. And name drop, I was fortunate enough to work with him on Community, and he was great and really kind. But I cannot find any info on what happened with that casting. Or who he was even supposed to play in the film. Did you come across anything?
No. And it jumps out where it's like, oh, and then having seen the film, you're like, oh, that never happened. So
yeah, I mean, as we get into the films, we can speculate on who he might have played, but it jumped out at me. I mean, honestly, I was expecting to see him in the film.
All right, well, that's kind of the backstory. Here, we end up here. Spike Lee is inspired by this project. He's able to raise the money himself. This is 100% his project. So what is it? What are we talking about? It's a vampire movie. The plot concerns Dr. Hess Green. He's an affluent anthropologist, and he's studying an ancient culture that were blood drinkers. One night, his unstable assistant has a complete mental breakdown and ends up stabbing him with a ceremonial dagger before killing themselves with a pistol. It's important that they're 2 different weapons. The germs on the dagger end up infecting Dr. Green, and he turns into a vampire and who must drink blood in order to survive. And they end up in a romantic relationship with the assistant's wife or ex-wife, depending on what version you see, who comes looking for him. That's the basic like building blocks of the project. The execution is a little differently, but I'm going to start here with, I would love to hear Andreas's thoughts, completely untethered from Ganja and Hess.
I had to settle with this film a little bit after I watched it. There are so many themes explored, and I had to wrestle with what was connecting for me. They never wanted to say vampire, but this is a vampire love story that explores addiction. And instead of drugs, it's blood. It has all the gothic horror tropes of a vampire film. Count Dracula living a solitary existence in his castle. And here you have Dr. Green living a solitary existence in his mansion on Martha's Vineyard. I loved that aspect. I love that we're getting a Black-focused gothic horror film. I do feel some of the performances took me out of it at times, but overall, I can admire what it's going for, even though I unfortunately have a lot of questions. But you have to admire it. Lee is going for it here, and it's his first horror film, right?
I guess I would say outright, I guess Summer of Sam kind of dips its toes into it, but that's more of, Summer of Sam to me is more of a reaction to also like true crime, and also the focus isn't on the killer, the focus is on a nervous neighborhood. But other than that, that's like it's a vampire movie. It's a now I know that's, I think Bill Gunn would say my description of that's reductive. But I mean, just it's honestly, it involves vampires, and that's what's driving the story. So not I don't mean that in any insulting way, but that's what it's about.
Yeah, it's about that. But even in characters in the film, when Ganja at one point asks Hess, "Are you a vampire?" he says, "I'm addicted to blood." So they are sort of going out of their way to not describe themselves as vampires, which I did feel a lot of it felt disjointed, especially with the music. It seemed to contradict
I would love to talk to you about the soundtrack.
Yeah, it seemed to contradict what we were seeing on screen a lot, and a lot of different music genres were used, and music has always been a massive part of Spike Lee films. I just felt like I don't know if you noticed this. I felt there were scenes that used hip hop
Yep.
as a motif for when something nefarious might be introduced. And it really hit me when there's a scene where Hess pulls up to the house with Tangier in the car. But the two moments where I noticed there wasn't a hip hop score used were the scenes where he goes to the projects and hits on that woman on the bench.
Yep.
Are those scenes in the original?
We'll get into the. I'll go through some differences, but
okay, all right, yeah.
Okay.
I'll just finish my thoughts and then we can get into it.
Yes, not in the way they're portrayed here. That's
interesting.
That's how.
Okay. Yeah, I can't wait to hear. Like the first time Green drinks blood from Lafayette's dead body, there's a dramatic score, and it's not played as a horrific scene, which I actually appreciated. I liked that. I was like, okay, this is giving me something different, because like I said earlier, Spike Lee likes to play with our expectations sometimes. And this film, by any other filmmaker, they would have played it as a full-on horror film, but he's not doing that. And that beautiful piano score, it's by Bruce Hornsby, who did the score for the film. Now, Terrence Blanchard has scored most of Spike Lee's films, but he didn't do this one. And I had to look it up. Blanchard did not do the score for Lee's other remakes, Old Boy and Highest to Lowest.
That's interesting. I do not mean this in an insulting way at all. Do you feel like Hornsby is kind of in a Blanchard wheelhouse? Because I hear it. Do you feel like he's kind of, does this soundtrack remind you of other Spike Lee films? Because to me, I kind of hear callbacks with his score.
I do hear it, to the point where I was surprised when I noticed, when I was looking up credits, that it was not him.
No, I agree. If you had told me Blanchard did it, I would have thought that was him.
Yeah, same.
Well, I guess,
same.
Is this true that were the songs, was that part of the crowdsourcing? Was that part of this whole Kickstarter thing where he was pulling in tracks from folks? So it's a little bit more diverse. Like, look, Spike Lee's always been great with music. He's one of the great directors that use musics and needle drops and all that jazz. What stands out here is not a lot of the songs are necessarily recognizable. I believe that was part of the crowdfunding where he just had like people sending in. So there's a lot more. It's an independent production, but it's an independent soundtrack.
Oh, I didn't come across that.
I believe that's what happened.
That's amazing, because I'll be honest, I actually liked a lot of the songs in the film. I ended up Shazamming a few of them.
Well, sometimes it works really well. Sometimes it doesn't. And I think that's kind of the enigma of this movie, is I think it's such a creative blast of like freedom. And like you were saying before, without any studio notes, I think he got all these songs and it was excited to be working with like these independent creatives. And he just put them all over the film, and some of them land like giant thumbs up, and some of them land, you're like, I'm not sure that's what I would be using. So I just think this goes back to what we were saying before. Even when Spike Lee does something that maybe we're not a fan of or we don't connect with, it's in an interesting way. So I think this is a fascinating soundtrack, whether or not I think it's working at all times.
I love how he plays with music. But then for this film, with the music contradictions, I'm still trying to figure out, maybe you can help me, and this gets a little bit into the story, but I'm still grappling with the reason for Hess introducing Tangier to Ganja.
Okay.
Like Tangier and Ganja, they have a dance scene with no music.
Okay, and I'm sorry to set the scene. In the movie, Hess wants Ganja with him forever. So unbeknownst to her, he does the similar thing where he stabs her with a dagger, thus turning her into a vampire. So she doesn't have any say in the matter. Now that she's turned, she needs to feed. So in the most prominent example of that, he brings somebody over for her to eat. And in this version, it's an ex of his named Tangier. And they kind of have this seduction scene where she's pulling her in, and it's kind of, the sensual scene. But the point is to end with them feeding upon her.
So that is the point. Because, Ganja says, do you want to dance? And Tangier responds with, there's no music. And Ganja says, we don't need music. And I don't know if I'm reading too much into this, but this is a moment where they exist on a different level than everyone else, because it's the first time we're not getting music. And I also sort of read it as foreshadowing that they end up together in the end. Again, I don't know if I'm reading too much into it.
Okay, so I think even Gunn with Ganja and Hess would say, you take away from it whatever you want. That's the correct interpretation. Like, he was coming from the Bergman school like we'll get into kind of how he structured his film. I feel like seeing the OG, I've got a take. But that doesn't
Mhm.
take away if that's your interpret of the power dynamics of that scene, that totally works. I'm gonna have a slightly different one, but again, that doesn't I don't think either one of us has to be right or wrong in that situation. I think my version of it is Hess is giving her an ex that was not invited to the wedding. So you know a few things. This is they get Hess and Ganja get married. And even Tangier makes a comment like, well, it would have been nice to get invited. They kind of like brush it off and the scene goes on. But I think he's not close to this person anymore. And I think it's a way of symbolically I'm cutting ties with you're the only one for me, Ganja. I'll literally feed you somebody I used to love to you. And I think
Okay.
Ganja kind of gets off on the fact that like she like there's a power play for Tangier. The power play is I get to hook up with my ex's current person. So that gives you a little bit of power. To Ganja, the power is I'm going to literally consume you. So I think there's the power. They don't even know they're two independent things happening at the same time. So I took it as she's not on the equal playing field with Ganja and Hess, but she doesn't know how unbalanced the power dynamic is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, again, I don't know how much we want to get into it now because that scene has me questioning something else that happens, but we can get into it
All right, well, look,
later.
I guess I just before I jump back into Ganja and Hess, and then we can get into differences and kind of like overall like feelings. I think a lot of Spike Lee films are disjointed. There's something funny happens, something really screwed up happens, just like a musical cue. I mean, we're talking about off mic, Jungle Fever, the ending of Jungle Fever. Sheesh, what a head spinning like moment. And like most
Yeah.
filmmakers wouldn't end on that note. And I think his movies are littered with stuff like that. I see critics on like Letterboxd confused by the tone of this. Hey, if that's how you feel, that's how you feel. But part of me is like, he's been doing this his entire career. He's been mixing genres and kind of blending stuff and putting it together. So I guess just at the end, like before we get into the Ganja House, just kind of walking out of this without any other like context, what kind of stood out to you? Did you like the romance angle? Did you like the addiction angle? Were there any like what did you kind of walk away from the story that you liked or didn't like?
I really liked, again, like I said earlier, the gothic horror aspect of it. The film really picked up for me once Ganja entered his life. You have that great phone call where she's looking for her ex-husband, but you can tell she just does not like him at all. And, we'll get into our favorite scenes later, but it's easy to say that there's a few amazing scenes where the power play and power dynamic between Ganja and Hess, I loved seeing them play off of each other.
Not to lean on interesting, not to lean on fascinating, but another thing that kind of stands out about any of these versions is kind of what you just touched on. Ganja's not in the whole movie, and
Yeah.
Ganja and Hess is, I believe, 1 hour 53 minutes. She doesn't enter until the 40-minute mark, and then here I believe she enters at around the half-hour mark of a 2 hour movie. The entire first act belongs to Hess, and then he's a more kind of reserved person. You're kind of dealing with his response. She's a very like get to the point, straight shooter, whatever. And the film just definitely gets like a blast of energy once they kind of enter. And that's something that they even struggled with in the original while they were editing it. Was there a way to introduce her faster? And they ended up deciding just no, that the film is the film. But even the filmmaker was like, maybe it would be great if she was in the 5-minute mark, but just that.
Yeah, and there was, you need that journey. You need to see Hess becoming that blood addict that he ends up becoming when he meets Ganja. But I'll be honest, the first time when Hess was stabbed, there's that amazing shot, overhead shot, where he wakes up to a gunshot.
Yes. Yeah.
And then he ends up looking at the knife. There was a moment where I wasn't sure if he had always had this power or if this was the first time he was discovering that he had the power. Now, obviously, that gets answered in the very next scene where he's praying to Jesus, tries to shoot himself, and nothing happens, so he knows he's immortal. But I thought that would have been an interesting take as well, with him having studied the Ashanti people. And I don't know if we've mentioned that already, but the supernatural Afro-cultural studies that Hess is doing with the character of Lafayette Hightower is about Ashanti. Is that how you say it?
I have in my note the Mithrians, but that might be a Ganja and Hess thing.
Oh, so interesting.
We don't want to get this wrong. They could be different in both versions.
No, that's actually a really good point. Yeah, in the Sweet Blooded Jesus, it's Ashanti.
Okay.
Let me just.
I'm sorry. The Myrthian, Myrthia. So I believe that's fictionalized for the film.
The knife that Hess gets stabbed with is a relic from the Ashanti people that he and Lafayette Hightower had been when studying. I didn't understand Lafayette's motivation for A, wanting to kill himself, and B, wanting to stab Hess. Is it implied, and this might be, I don't know if it's something explored a little bit more in the original. A part of me wanted to answer that by, in my head, giving the film the benefit of the doubt and saying that with Lafayette studying the Ashanti people, he was going a little crazy. But I don't think that's explicitly said, right?
Well, again, I don't want to color too much of it. And again, our experiment is, what is the movie? So if that's your version of it, that's no. What I'm saying is, there's no wrong answer. If the movie is not giving that to you,
Yeah,
that's something that the movie did not. You know what I mean? Like, it's like using a cheat sheet. That's almost how I feel with like the Ganja Hess. Again, my take, and well, you know what? Maybe now's a good time to go back to Ganja Hess.
Well, hold on. Before we do that, I want to apologize. I'm not trying to ask you to answer. It's more just curiosity.
You know what? That's actually a good jumping off point. Why don't we go back to Ganja Hess?
Okay.
And then we'll see where we're at. And then again, no, and I also hats off to you for like jumping into this cold in a way. It's like flashback to the release of the film. It's in one New York theater and ends up going to Cannes, and it wins a Critics' Choice Award overseas. But here, the producers are horrified because working with the editor, Bill Gunn, he had turned in a screenplay, he shot what he wrote. But in getting it into the editing room, he got creative. So he was pulling exposition out of the movie. So there's expository scenes, they're just gone. There's other instances where characters are having a conversation that's expository. It's still in the movie, but he'll lay like a prayer over it, or he'll lay like a song over it. So the exposition in the film is cut down. But I will say the film opens with the title card. It says, Dr. Hess Green, director of anthropology, director of geology, while studying the ancient black civilization of Myrthia, was stabbed by a stranger 3 times, one for God the Father, one for the Son, and one for the Holy Ghost. Stabbed with a dagger diseased by that ancient culture, whereupon he became addicted and could not die, nor could he be killed. That's just words on a screen.
And that's just words on screen. I mean, that's a hell of an opening.
And that's it. And then you're into the movie. So yes, there's exposition cut out, but that just told you a lot of heavy lifting of what you need to know.
Yeah.
And I love in the movie, instead of Lafayette, in this film, it's George Madra. I think Spike Lee wanted to, again, he's playing with race and class. So I think he's giving them, I think the name is clearly a Spike Lee like touch, and he's commenting on this character and their status. It follows the same basic thrust of everything you just said. That version, if you watch Ganja Hess, you recognize it. But the sound design by Sam Wayman, who was working closely with Bill Gunn. They lived together. They were creative partners. They worked on other projects together. It is it's soulful. It has gospel. It has tribal chanting. It has heavy breathing. It has screaming. It has reverb. The way the movie is edited, it's abstract at times. A lot of it's you kind of like putting stuff together. It's fascinating. And so it's almost like a visual and audio tone poem about this vampire love story. And I was very struck with it. But I didn't always know what was going on at every single moment. I got the gist of it. I could tell that person's upset. This person is, this person's happy, because you couldn't always hear the dialogue that was explaining exactly what's going on. But I got the feeling of what was there. And got it. I was very like, wow, I've never seen a movie like that before. Now I'll always defend the artist, and Bill Gunn turned in something amazing, but I do get why the producers were a little freaked out. This was not Blackula. This was an very artsy vampire film. So they pulled it out of the one theater. They went back and recut it. And this is my surprise to you. I didn't watch one movie in preparation for this. I watched 2 movies in preparation for this.
Wow.
Because they took the 1 hour and 53 minute cut of Ganja Hess and cut it down to 75 minutes and released it as Blood Couple. But the interesting thing is they put expository scenes back into the film. So it plays like a different movie.
Oh, man. So I'm so curious to hear the differences now.
My hot take number 1 is I think Blood Couple's okay. It's not special. That's the big, like with Ganja Hess, you're watching, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. The soundtrack, something like disturbing will happen. It's repeating. It's just like, you feel it like an emotional level. Blood Couple, they really cut back on the soundtrack. If I was Sam Wayman, I'd be like furious, like because he put so much work into the one, and this one was different. But it's more straightforward. And I feel like if I stumbled across that on cable, I'd be like, wow, that's an interesting curiosity. That's a pretty good movie. But even for a hack job at 75 minutes, it's not like Bill Gunn didn't write the scenes. It's not like Bill Gunn didn't direct the scenes.
Yeah.
It's not like the cast didn't do a great job. It's just he didn't think that happened to serve the story. I don't need to explain everything. I could pull some of this stuff out.
So this wasn't the producers going to shoot new material to add in. It's taking what Gunn had already cut out and restructuring the timeline to release it as a different film. Oh man, that's crazy.
So Gunn took his name off it. I think it's here. I want to get.
I mean, look, to be honest, to go back to Spike Lee, if he had always had the intention of remaking this film, knowing that history, a Kickstarter makes even more sense, right? Without studio interference, he could make an experimental horror film that he'd always wanted to make.
Gunn took his name off the project. Victor Konevsky, the editor, who I want to give full credit to because it really is like a very eye-poppingly edited film, he took his name off. The cinematographer was debating taking his name off, and they actually talked him out of it because like it's still your images. It's not my editing. It's not his directorial vision, but you shot it, so he kept his on. And I believe the new editor, like under a pseudonym, got the director credit on Blood Couple. So if you can find Blood Couple, if you look around. So it's funny, for decades, the only version of this you could see was Blood Couple. And now the only version of this you can really see is Ganja Hess, because in the early 2000s, they restored it. But Lee's version isn't as experimental as Ganja Hess. You can at all times tell what's happening. I mean, they're having conversations with each other. You're not cutting out the dialogue and just putting in like other material over it. So it's funny to see like it is marrying these two things into one, only with the Lee touch on it. So it's a fascinating kind of stew of ideas. Just
I'm a little jealous. I'm a little jealous of your experience of all three of these films. Now, as I was watching To Sweet Blood of Jesus, I did keep asking myself, I wonder what the original is like, which, you know, maybe goes against our initial experiment anyway. I should have just watched the original too.
No, but I think this was, if anything, like maybe that's the lesson. And we'll kind of get into like, if we flipped a coin, I gladly would have watched this one. I would have been curious the whole time, don't get me wrong, but I think it is interesting. Just how does this stand on its own 2 feet? Just because we're on the topic, I'm not sure when we're going to visit Ganja Hess again. That one stars Dwayne Jones from Night of the Living Dead and Marlene Clark. They're both fantastic. They're great in it. He was reluctant to do this because of Night of the Living Dead. He's like, oh, people remember me from that zombie movie. I'm a serious actor, and they really had to twist his arm. He's great. So, I mean, I'm glad he agreed to do it. I wish he was in more. I mean, I've had Night of the Living Dead in my life for most of my life. You know, I remember watching that at a young age. He's always been great, but to see him stretch a whole bunch of different muscles, acting muscles, that was a legit thrill. Marlene Clark is such a blast of energy in this, like just like into Sweet Blood, but she comes in on a phone call. It totally changes like the tone of the film. And then Sam Wayman not only does the soundtrack, he plays the Reverend character. So there's a priest in this one, but he's not really a character. You see him, he marries them. There's a scene at the end in the church. He gives himself like a full introduction, and the first VO you hear is him. And so I think this is kind of his opening is first words you hear. It's like this, and you see him in church. You see, I've been a minister for a long time. I like it. I've been at this church. This church is very good. In fact, the people are very warm to me, and they love me. They love me very much, which is very good because that pulls something out of me, as well as giving them something, pulling something out of them. My official title is Reverend Luther Williams. I also work as a chauffeur and stableman part-time to help support my family. I work with Dr. Hess Green, and then you see him in his car, and he's kind of bent over for those of you listening, and he's an addict. He's not a criminal. He's a victim. He's addicted to blood. And then you don't hear from him for a long time. So it's just there to just kind of set that up. If he knows, this is where kind of the poetry and the artistry comes through. We have questions about the sweet blood of Jesus. There's moments that we can question. By presenting it in such an artful fashion, I have a question about the Reverend. Here he says he's an addict, he's addicted to blood. So my question is, how does he know that Hess is a vampire? Is he complicit in Hess being a vampire? If he's a Reverend, why isn't he more bothered? The film never addresses these questions. It's just there, and then you see him pop up, and because it's presented so poetically, I don't question it. If this information,
you don't need to. With that amount of voiceover, you know he knows. Let's go on from there. In The Sweet Blood of Jesus, you have the same questions with Green's butler, Seneschal. But it's never explicitly said that he knows that Green is addicted to blood. You kind of question it.
I think what you're getting at is it's unsatisfying in the Lee version because it's direct.
Thank you. That's exactly, that's the word I'm looking for.
In Ganja Hess, you can ask those questions, but it doesn't matter. So the
Right.
same basic framework is there the whole time, but the devil's in the details. First off, instead of talking about the project, George is like trying to tell a funny story that's not landing. He's like so appreciative for getting like a good meal. The first image you see of George is him holding a gun. It's to use on himself. So it's giving you kind of this stream of consciousness introduction to this character. And then at one point in both films, the assistant climbs up in a tree and is teasing that they're going to hang himself, and Hess has to kind of talk him down. In Blood Couple, in the one with more exposition, and in The Sweet Blood of Jesus, what follows is a conversation about the mental health, but also a little bit more exposition. In Ganja and Hess, instead of talking at all about the plot, it's the assistant telling about a previous suicide attempt. And it's a long scene. And he goes, when I was in that moment, I was a murderer and I was a victim all in one. And I had a knife to my throat, and the murderer had a knife to the victim's throat. I didn't do it. So the murderer let the victim go. And then it's him attacking, it's Hess in bed and the murderer attack. And that's such a more poetic way to A, just tell you about this character, and B, isn't that a metaphor for Hess himself? He's a murderer and a victim at the same time. So it's like, you could give me the expository scene that's explained. This is a dagger. It's got this stuff. Here's the society. All right. Or you could give me this very visceral, well-acted scene. And also, in that movie, Bill Gunn plays the assistant. So the writer, director, he also has this big supporting role as the assistant. After he stabs Hess and Hess is out, he writes a suicide note that's like poetry, and he writes it out in a typewriter, and then he pulls it out and it's him just reading. Is that moving the plot along? Is that moving, I'm using the plot? No, but is it a lovely moment? Ganja Hess is full of stuff like that. So I guess you asked some questions before. Instead of luring an ex to the house, they just lure a random handsome guy. So that's interesting for a few reasons. One, the ex. Two, it's a woman now in this version. The other thing is, you had asked about he feeds off a young mother. They don't speak. So actually, I like that in The Sweet Blood of Jesus, the pickup. In Ganja and Hess, he just looks over and sees her. She kind of gives him a look, and then he follows her into the building. And the next time you see her, she's dead in bed. So in Lee's version, there's actually a little bit of buildup where they talk, and it's kind of, he's trying to negotiate his way into like a tryst with her to feed on her, and that's a Lee edition.
And then the second time he visits her, she killed the baby, right?
Yes. Yeah. Or yeah.
That was horrifying.
Okay, I guess just we're tackling a lot. We're tackling 2 to 3 movies in this discussion.
Yeah.
I think there's a level of like, I just bare bones. The poetry of Ganja and Hess carries it over some narrative stumbles. And again, in an art project, you're not going to, you don't look at the Mona Lisa and you're trying to like pick away at certain things. And like, there's ways you approach different things in art. I feel like Ganja and Hess almost makes itself bulletproof to some things that are present in Blood Couple and To Sweet Blood of Jesus. Some big differences are like what I just kind of said there. Whenever Hess bites somebody, so he picks up a prostitute, and then there's the young mother. You later see them again. They reanimate. So it's almost like a disease or a spreading addiction.
And sorry, is this also in Ganja and Hess or just in the new?
No, they're dead. They're straight dead. So he leaves the mother that he hooks up with and feeds on her, and you can hear the baby crying. That's the end of them. You never go back to them. So you don't know if anybody got the baby. You don't know what happened there. So one, that's interesting. But two, where that kind of gets a little thorny into Sweet Blood of Jesus is into Sweet Blood of Jesus, whenever there's a vampire victim, they reanimate. And they don't explain, they don't get into it, but you see them again, including Tangier, the ex that they bring over for Ganja to feed on. In Ganja and Hess, when they go to dispose of the lover's body, he's still moving. And she gets really upset. She goes, he's still moving. They leave him for dead. So there's no expectation in Ganja and Hess that person's going to get back up. So then in Ganja and Hess, at the very end, when Hess eventually decides he's a monster, he needs to destroy himself, Ganja's like, I don't want, it's like, I love you, but I'm going to stick around. You see the lover again, he's reanimated. And you don't necessarily get that she loves that lover in the same way that she loved, same thing in To Sweet Blood of Jesus, but that reanimation is a surprise at the end of Ganja and Hess, whereas in To Sweet Blood of Jesus, it weirdly tips its hand because everybody's been reanimating up to that point.
Yeah, wow, that's such an interesting new addition to it. it still makes me question the motivation about Tangier because they end up burying her alive. So were they just going to let her live like that? At the end of the movie, she obviously returns, walks on the beach, and stands next to Ganja. But
I agree with you. That's a narrative question I wouldn't ask in Ganja and Hess. I do ask here because it seems like Hess would know, oh, yeah, she's going to get back up. But that's never discussed or acknowledged or anything in the film. I don't know quite what to make of that
yeah,
here. Also, if I can just again, since I'm not sure the next time we're talking about Ganja and Hess, Sam Wayman, who played the Reverend in the film and does the soundtrack, he had a sister, Eunice Kathleen Wayman. Her stage name was Nina Simone.
whoa.
Nina Simone's brother did the soundtrack, and they worked together for years. This was all new information to me. Really cool artist, Sam Wayman. Please look him up. A lot of cool stuff in there, but there's a lot of
Wow.
little like
That's awesome.
bells. My reaction to Sweet Blood Jesus is pretty similar to yours. Honestly, a lot of your like the pros, the cons, it's there. I was a little surprised at how cold this was, to be honest, because I feel like Lee's a very warm filmmaker. You can feel it's like his heart in his sleeve, and there's not to say there's not moments here that hit that, but whereas Ganja and Hess feels like raw. And there's moments of just like, I want to put poetry in here. I want this moment to feel real. It's really just like an artist putting whatever they feel like into the film. This feels almost cold and sterile at times. And like coming from Lee, that was a surprise to me. And there are blasts of like Spike Lee creativity that you've come to expect. And I really like how they're used. I'm just a little surprised it didn't go a little bit more gonzo. Maybe that's a budgetary thing, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I felt a little bit of the same way, just in the performance by Stephen Tyrone Williams, who played Hess Green. I liked his performance, but I could see that there was a little bit of sterileness to it. You know, like his performance when he first is explaining about the Ashanti, he brings Lafayette to his house in Martha's Vineyard, and they're having that discussion about God and science and art. And it's a great scene, but there is a sort of sterileness and almost.
Well, if I can tag in on this,
yeah,
I hear what you're saying on Williams' portrayal of Hesgrin because I feel like he's putting on a character. He's putting on a cold character. I feel like he's this rich, affluent, doctor who maybe feels out of sync with the people around him. And I feel like he's projecting a version of himself that people expect. At one point, he's at a garden party. It's played for laughs where I believe he's the only black person there. There's humor and satire about kind of his position. And I think he plays with that. Like that's how he's portraying this character, is uncomfortable in his own skin, both because of his life and also now he's a vampire. I feel like with Dwayne Jones in the original, that dichotomy coming from this position of wealth, how he interacts with his peers, it's all there. I just feel like Jones feels more confident than Williams does. And I feel like it's a conscious choice, but like that colors this film. Again, it's a little bit more muted. And again, with Lafayette, in Ganja and Hess, the George Maida character, he's a wild man. He's like sweating, like he seems uncomfortable. To me, Lafayette and Hess, they kind of occupy the same space. You know what I mean? They're not they're similar characters, just one seems to be going through a mental crisis and the other one isn't. Whereas in the other version, George is like chatty Cathy. I think this could have used more of a dichotomy between those two characters to really like make that pop.
That's fair. That's a great statement because there was that moment where, you mentioned that he was the assistant in the original. I never got that. I just took it as he was sort of a research colleague of this at this museum. And the way they speak to each other at Hess's house does sort of put them on at least intellectually equal footing.
No, but I think that's a really good point because in Ganja and Hess, they are absolutely positively not, because Hess is so cool, calm, collected, and also it's his amazing house and he's eating amazing food. He keeps commenting on the meal. Wow, I haven't had food this good in forever. So just you can see like the social standing. They're in two completely different arenas. I don't viscerally feel that. And just I get it, but I also get it because I've seen the other version. I'm carrying that with me into this movie. You don't have that.
And I think that also goes into my confusion about the character of Lafayette.
I think Ganja and Hess does a better job of setting the table for Lafayette or George's breakdown more than here. And again, it's not that it's not there. Lafayette mentions I was in Belgium. Bellevue, the system, etc.
Well,
The
see,
bottom,
again, sorry to interrupt. My confusion there was I didn't know if he was in Bellevue as part of another research thing. I didn't know if he was
okay.
looking at patients there or if it was part of the research they were doing. I kept asking myself, so was he there as a patient? Was he driven mad by his experiences there as someone doing research?
Okay, no, and that makes total sense. Well, one thing, a plus in both films, all three films, but really Ganja and Hess and Sweet Blood Jesus, is kind of Hess's decision to like turn his life around. So here he's been this blood-sucking monster. At first doesn't seem to bother him. Then it kind of comes around. So full credit to Spike Lee. In Ganja and Hess and in Blood Couple, basically it goes down like Hess marries Ganja. Unbeknownst to Ganja, he infects her with the dagger, starts to give her blood, brings somebody over for her to feed on. She's a little freaked out by the experience in all instances. Then, in all three versions, Hess just starts reflecting on ending himself. And that seemed a little abrupt to me because it's like you just brought Ganja over. Why are you thinking about like ending your life? And Lee adds a scene that the other films don't have. He runs into one of his victims from earlier who had a baby, and it's implied she's killed or done or turned either way, something terrible's happened to that child because he has turned her into a vampire. I love Lee added that because that shows a push for why he would want to change his life around. That's not present in Ganja and Hess and Blood Couple. And I'll say Ganja and Hess is so poetic and abstract, you don't necessarily need it. You just get the fact that he wants it is reason enough. In Blood Couple, it does come off very abrupt. Hey, I'm going to change you into a vampire. You know what? I'm out of here. I'm going to kill myself. It's like, well, why'd you even bother to bring me over then?
It felt sudden in The Sweet Blood of Jesus for me too, but you having already seen the original probably didn't feel as sudden. But yeah, you absolutely need that scene to see how he changed. And it led to a really great scene. And I know we're not in our categories yet, but there's that great fireside chat where he's talking about their next steps towards destruction, their own self-destruction. And he says, I'm tired of this existence. It's a fantastic scene.
So to turn himself over to I don't want to live this life anymore. He goes to a church and during the service he goes up and like the priest like blesses him, you like feel like Jesus within you. And it's this cathartic moment in all three of I think it's one of the standout like scenes. In The Sweet Blood of Jesus, they're using the Sam Wayman song.
I did end up watching the trailer for Ganja and Hess after I watched The Sweet Blood of Jesus, and I was very surprised to see that they were using the same song. That is a great song. It is catchy. It is so catchy. I was humming it after I had watched the movie.
It's great, and I love that they, if you're going to use it, that's the place to use it. And the other thought is, if you had asked me before, and Greg, what is the one thing you want in a Spike Lee, I swear, a remake of Ganja and Hess? I would have said, when he goes, you have to have the church scene. When he goes to the church scene, you have to use the Spike Lee shot.
Nice.
And that's what they do. And they have a prim approach. And when that happened, I was like,
I had the exact same reaction. I was like, there it is. There's the shot. I love it. For those who don't know, who aren't massive Spike Lee fans, he has a very, very distinct dolly shot of characters walking that he uses in all of his films. And it's basically them standing on the dolly track and being pulled along with the camera as if they're walking. It's his signature. Yeah. How does the OG end?
So the OG ends pretty much the same way. He goes to the church service, he comes home. If he's under the shadow of the cross and kind of gives himself over to it, that'll destroy himself. He asks Ganja to join him. She doesn't want to. And then once he's vanquished, she actually, there's a quick scene with the authorities where the body gets like packed up, which is funny because in such an artful film, you don't even necessarily need that, but it is there. And then it's her looking out on her property now. And you see the lover from before. Again, that's a surprise that he's back, coming out of a pool and running towards the house. And as he's running towards the house, there is the butler's dead body on the ground. So they saved that moment for them. You don't know anything happened to the butler. And then he doesn't make it into the house to her. So she's looking down at him. And then she kind of just looks over at the camera. Now she's going to be this immortal being. And then that's where the film ends.
Well, I love in the Sweet Blood of Jesus, Tangier shows up naked, walking along the beach towards Ganja, and it's not a surprise that she's still alive because they had established that earlier in the film. But there is that same moment. Ganja in the Sweet Blood of Jesus looks at the camera, but it's almost like a what the fuck
Yeah. But now say Blood Couple, she is like recoiling from the swinging cross, and it's implied that it kills her too. And the movie just ends.
Whoa, that is so different. Yeah, those producers wanted to spoon feed a lot, huh?
Yes. These are all fascinating movies. I mean, like highly
Yes.
recommend Ganja and Hess. I think watching the other two and just kind of processing the different versions of the same screenplay can kind of get manipulated. But one thing that's the same but presented differently is in The Sweet Blood of Jesus, Ganja kind of lays out her life motto. When she was a kid, she got into a fight with her brothers. Her dad taught her, you have to look out for yourself. And that's
Yeah.
Ganja. And that's at the end of the film. That's Ganja. She's looking out for her. I don't want to die. There's a version of that in Ganja and Hess, but it's a completely different speech. I thought that was interesting. And that's about like her, basically her mother not trusting her. And then that
Yeah.
that shattered her trust in people. I thought that was interesting. Blood Couple doesn't have that. So again, even though it's more straightforward, I think that's a crucial scene because it shows like Ganja and Hess love each other. That's not questioned throughout the film. In fact, she thinks he's a crazy guy who thinks he's a vampire. She doesn't believe he's a vampire. She thinks he's a vampire.
In Ganja and Hess.
And I'd say into Sweet Blood of Jesus. It's not like she think I think she's tolerant of his. I think when she marries him, I don't necessarily think she believes he's a vampire.
Interesting.
Because she has the speech earlier where she says, "Why do all the rich guys have to be bonkers?"
Yeah.
I think she's just willing to go along with. I think she loves him, and if he's a weirdo, fine.
I think it might be conflating the timeline. Did she discover her husband's dead body in the freezer after they were married? That was
before. He tells her he killed himself. She's like, I believe you.
Yeah.
They get rid of the body together, and then they're married. But I don't think she believes he's a vampire. I think she just thinks her husband killed himself, and also this is also coming from Ganja and Hess. There's a scene after they get married. Let me find the quote. So again, I acknowledge that I'm taking in like additional info.
No, but that's part of this experiment, right?
They're in bed together after they get married, and she goes, "Everybody's some kind of freak. You're into horror movies. I can dig it." But she doesn't buy that. She doesn't think, "Oh, this guy's a vampire." She just thinks he's a weird dude. But that's their love. That's their love together.
And in The Sweet Blood of Jesus, I do love that moment where she sort of accepts it and helps him bury the body.
Yep. Another just weird scene. What are the first things if you were a producer you'd cut? But like Bill Gunn fought to keep it in, like Ganja and Hess. Hess has a son, and there's one scene where he runs into his son. They never explain. I'm assuming off at a boarding school, but they don't even explain it. He's at a party. Everybody's well dressed. They're surprised to see each other. He asks the son how he's doing in French, and then they speak French to each other for like 30 seconds, and then that's it. Goodbye, son. And I think the point was just to show that Hess has this full three-dimensional like life. It's absolutely not needed for the quote unquote plot of the film, but for Bill Gunn, those were the meaty important parts of the movie.
But it also establishes the social structure of where he is, right?
Yes,
in the world.
yes.
So that obviously helps it. I think in The Sweet Blood of Jesus, Spike Lee does that with the amount of different cars that
yes. Yep.
Hess has, and then also all the art he collects. And there was a moment in The Sweet Blood of Jesus when he goes to his penthouse in Manhattan, and there are those quick cuts of all the African art around the apartment. It reminded me of, have you seen the 2022 film Nanny?
No.
Oh, you should check that out.
I heard it was good. Yeah.
Yeah, you should definitely check that out. It reminded me of that just with the art, and that's a very dark, sort of magical realist, supernatural film. It's an awesome movie. You should check it out.
I heard good things about it. One thing I think it's important to point out is, so since this Baptist church that he's at is also in Red Hook Summer, and in Red Hook Summer is also Mookie, his character from Do the Right Thing, and Agent Flood from 25th Hour and She Hate Me, that technically there's a vampire that exists in all these movies.
I love it.
There is, vampires exist in the world of Do the Right Thing.
That's amazing.
Anything you want to say before we move over to our categories? I mean, honestly, from Ganja and Hess, there's so many quotes and weird little moments, and just I hate to come in on just Sweet Blood Jesus. I absolutely think people should see it, but I think they should see them together. Sorry, Andreas. I was trying to think of a comparison, and flawed, but please go with me. The Natalie Cole, Nat King Cole duet of Unforgettable. The song is beautiful, but I think knowing that's her father and knowing that he's dead, and they stitched that together to do a call and response, I think gives that song even more power. That's me with The Sweet Blood of Jesus. I think it's a fine movie. I don't think it's Spike Lee at its highest powers. Even a Spike Lee B-side, which this is, I still find it interesting. I mean, like, I don't think this is like my favorite movie because I don't think it's bad, but I think it gets power when you can hold the mirror of this up to what came before the Bill Gunn material.
You know, I said when you initially asked me what I thought of the film that I was still sort of wrestling with it. I would say that it's worth watching if you're a Spike Lee fan. It's his first horror movie, and it does explore a lot of really great themes. Now, whether they all come together and work for you, that's up to you.
Also, for the podcast, I'll go back through a movie sometimes trying to find quotes, trying to find scenes, trying to just this played better on a second watch. So I'm not saying people you have to watch it because like that, what a weird recommendation that is.
Right.
But I will say maybe some of that awkwardness, maybe some of that stuff that didn't work. Sure, it's there. It didn't hit me as hard the second time around. I kind of appreciated it being its own thing. So
nice.
Yeah. Our categories are just a part where we can highlight some of our favorite moments and performances from the film. It's just jumping in. What's the heart of the film?
I mean, for me, it's short and simple. It's the reconciling with the monster you can become through addiction. Even in Spike Lee's Kickstarter video for the project, he says, we all have many addictions: drugs, money, sex, power, blood.
Yeah.
He says that for the film, but I really did like the way you could watch this as if Hess was a drug addict. Mm-hmm. And exploring that side of it.
So also, I wanted to call out, I'm a big fan of Larry Fessenden's The Habit and Abel Ferrara's The Addiction. And I feel like that would make a good, if you wanted to have a movie marathon of vampire movies that deal with addiction, this is all like, now you've got like 5 interesting flicks to choose from all this. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I'd add in I do like this love story because they're 2 very different people that are accepting each other on their own terms. And it's interesting, like, he turns her into a vampire. She's not upset by that. He may have killed somebody that she cared about. They're accepting of each other's like flaws and their different like social backgrounds or whatever, and they still kind of come together. I like that. How much that succeeds and fails in the different versions, I'll leave that to the listener to decide. But I like this is an unconventional love story. And I'm not just saying that because it's a vampire and a human, but I think in the performances it's very interesting. And also one thing we didn't touch on, Rami Malek. In the film, we have a best actor. Sorry to derail it, but like one, it's just fascinating that we have a best actor hanging out in this film in a supporting role. But 2, in all these films, in all versions, the idea that Ganja comes in and starts bossing this person around as if she owns the place. I think that's a fascinating thing. Here's this person that's out. Like the only reason she's staying with Hess is because she doesn't have money. And who is she to? But like she instantly falls into like master and servant with this butler character. I love that as a detail.
No, and the politics at play, the power dynamic and politics at play are laid out very well and interesting to watch. I like what you said in terms of the love story. They are 2 very different characters. And like I had said earlier on, once she entered the film, it took it to another level for me that I really started paying a bit more attention and I really started enjoying it a little bit more.
Favorite scene?
The very first one is when they're both drinking wine and getting to know each other. She's walking around the living room, sort of checking things out, standing up, being the person at a higher elevation in power, looking down on him. However, what I appreciated about that scene is I love the way that Spike Lee and the DP framed Hess. He's slumped down on this antique bench / couch with, I don't know if you could tell the way the sculpture's set up behind him. It makes it look like he's a king on a throne. Oh, yeah, and I loved that aspect because as much as she's trying to be the one in power, it's his throne, it's his castle. He, being what he is, obviously has the power over her, and she doesn't know that. I loved that scene. The other scene I really, really liked, and I would actually pick this as my favorite scene. It opens with Seneschal, who, as he's cutting a piece of steak, is giving Ganja this stare. And it's very much this stare of disdain, but it's stone-faced. Had you not seen the scenes of how she had treated him before, you might not read too much into that look, but you knew exactly why he was looking at her that way as he's cutting the steak. And then after that, Ganja and Hess get into it. She reveals that she discovered her ex-husband's body in the freezer down below. He starts telling her the truth about how he had killed himself. It's the first moment where we see Ganja lower her guard and really show who she really is. I was entranced by their performances, by the dialogue, everything that was happening in that scene. And it's a really long scene. I mean, mean, her story where she's talking about her brothers beating her up and her father explaining that, you know, they were wrong to do that, but because you're a woman and because you're a woman of color, your life is going to be very, very difficult and you're going to have to stand up for yourself. You need to protect yourself. Ganja needs to look out for Ganja. That's all done in one take.
Yeah.
So that scene I thought was amazing. And then one other scene I just want to highlight is, and I mentioned it before, was the scene where they're sitting by the fireside. And again, Hess has already made the decision he wants to die. Mm-hmm. He's reading a book about his destruction and he's explaining to Ganja why he's doing that as they're both reconciling with the monsters they've become. I really like that scene too.
All great choices. I think Ganja's explanation of why she is the way she is in this and Ganja Hess is so important, and it's so lacking. Like, again, I kind of defend Blood Couple. I get it that such damage is done by missing that. The church. I think. Oh yeah. I love catharsis. Yeah. I love when a movie can capture accurately the weight of the world being lifted off somebody's shoulders. I think it's beautiful, and not everybody can do that. And again, coming up against Ganja Hess, they do it so beautifully there. It's a 1-to-1. They do the song, but then the Reverend gets to do a little bit of preaching, and then he invites people up, and he comes up. So there's a whole, it's like a 10-minute scene. This, I believe, is 6 minutes, but the song is playing the entire time. It's a way to put your own stamp on it. Yeah. Also, it's a great song, and like it builds in power for him to go up. And again, there's that Spike Lee shot I was waiting for. Yeah. So it's like, I wanted it to get there, and then the movie actually got there. And I really connected with that. I
did want to shout out before we move on to the next category, just for the church scenes, you know, because there is one in the beginning that establishes how he acts in church. John Batiste is the organ player in the scene, and he's a great musician. But also, we get a Stephen McKinley Henderson cameo just as a spectator on the side, doesn't have any sort of lines or anything, but he just pops up. I don't know if maybe he had a bigger role or he was in a different scene that ultimately got cut. But anytime I get to see Stephen McKinley Henderson on screen, I get excited. So
no, good catch. Good catch. All right, MVP.
I initially was going to go with Ganja, and that was my initial instinct, just because, again, she is this tour de force that once she comes on screen, you can't take your eyes off of her. She's played by Zara Abrahams. I love what she's doing with the role, but Rami Malek is there as Seneschal. He has a presence, and he does a lot with nothing. And I don't know if that was a direction given to him by Spike Lee, but one of my favorite moments is after they're wed, he's just standing there, and then suddenly he claps after a beat. And I couldn't tell if it was like a sarcastic clap or if that was just the way he clapped. I loved it. I thought he was fantastic in it. So I would give him MVP.
It is funny. You can't take your eyes off him in scenes.
Yeah.
And also the Butler character in the other version, he's fine. But it's and there are comedic beats there because of how poorly she's treating him. Where he gets out of so in all versions, or I'm not sure if it's in Blood Couple. Sorry guys, I've been watching all these different versions. So but definitely Ganja Hess and into Sweet Blood. There's the scene of them coming back from a shopping trip, him juggling like a ton of bags, and her still offering her hand, like, you need to be a gentleman and escort me out of the car. That's still a comedy beat in both of them, but he is not playing it over the top at all. Whereas, like you just said, you cannot take your eyes off of Malek. Like he's doing, like he's like he leans into it in a certain way, and no, he's great. I have to go Bill Gunn. I feel like we wouldn't be sitting here talking if it wasn't for director Bill Gunn. This was so much fun to kind of dive into the history. I blind bought a soap opera, a 2.5-hour soap opera that they made in the 80s that hopefully is going to arrive in the next couple of days.
Oh, that's awesome.
Personal problems. I can't wait to dive into soon. I hope I can find Stop at some point. This is his screenplay. I know Spike Lee made some adjustments, but like the bare bones are here, and the fact we're even talking about it would be for him. So he's my MVP.
That's awesome.
So did you feel this film was ahead of its time?
I don't think the film was ahead of its time, but I honestly feel the Kickstarter was ahead of its time.
Oh, okay.
And look, it's 2025, so we're looking back at this through a very different lens. And you had sort of touched on it a little bit already, but if Spike Lee were to crowdfund a film today, I don't think it would receive the same amount of criticism that it did back then.
Sure.
It would probably be discussed and dissected as more of a statement of the turmoil that the film industry is in today. You know, we're constantly hearing about filmmakers not being able to fund their films. And some, like Spike Lee, are turning to streaming services. You know, he made The Five Bloods for Netflix, which is an amazing film.
Mm-hmm.
Scorsese has made The Irishman for Netflix and then also Killers of the Flower Moon for Apple. And look, that topic can be explored on another episode of the podcast, but I do want to mention a quote from Michael Bay from March of this year. And it's, I just had a conference call with Jim Cameron and we were both commiserating about Hollywood. He said in a recent interview with a Hollywood Reporter, no one can greenlight anything anymore. It's just so slow. It's a very different business. Now, I'd gladly contribute to a Michael Bay, James Cameron, or Spike Lee Kickstarter today. And before anyone comments with, they don't need the money, maybe they do. I mean, go back to my statement about the freedom that would give them. There's a reason we love these filmmakers. Why wouldn't we want to contribute to help them make the movies they want to make?
No, absolutely. I would say it's of its time, partially because of he was using a new tool at his disposal, partially because I feel like, you know, again, it was a kind of a dip period, and now he's back, and I think things are great. But like, it was trying to maybe he had to be scrappy by design because he wasn't getting after larger projects, and also 2015, not to get political, that's pre-Trump, and I'm curious if our current political, you know, just landscape, would that change how these characters would interact anymore? Because, you know, that bled into To Five Bloods in an interesting way. I'm curious how that would have bled into this film, but unsure. So for underrated, I hope I'm saying this person's name correctly. There's an accent mark. Nate Bova as Tangier, the ex that we referenced earlier. This role did not exist in the other version. There's a person lured over, but they're not given this much screen time. I believe this is their only acting credit, if I looked that up correctly. She's tall. So in this moment, from her confidence and also her stature, she kind of comes in and is rivaling these two vampires. And in a very different way than Ganja Hess, you know, they bring over like an attractive young man for Ganja to seduce and then kill, but you never feel like they're on equal footing. That guy's lamb being led to the slaughter. She's in the same function, but in that scene, I feel like she's commanding a lot of the presence. If that's their only acting credit, I think they did a fantastic job. So they really stood out to me.
For me, I'm going to say for The Sweet Blood of Jesus, the production design. I mean, I don't think there was ever a moment where you questioned whether he was an exceptionally rich person.
Yeah.
You know, with all the cars they were able to get, all the African art staged around both his penthouse and the mansion, Martha's Vineyard, all the set design at the place in Martha's Vineyard. Now, who knows? Maybe they were borrowing someone's house, but they still had to make it believable that he lived there.
Yep.
And I really, really liked that.
Like I said, with the cars. They're gorgeous. And also they're not classic cars I necessarily would have thought of. No, it's a very, very cool looking, like a lot of attention to detail. And
and there's a couple of sorry, say again.
Maybe not the last time we're going to be talking about this in these categories. So we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, because even one of the cars that he has, it's very almost like Great Gatsby-esque. And with that setting on Martha's Vineyard, you could sort of see that parallel to the character of Hess, which is interesting too.
Who's having the most fun?
I think Zara Abrahams playing Ganja is having the most fun in The Sweet Blood of Jesus. I mean, what a great role. And you can have so much fun with this character. I would imagine, you know, not having seen the OG, you're probably going to say the actress who played her in Ganja Hess.
No, she was fantastic. But I'll say for me, it's Rami Malek, because what you called out, a character not given a lot, and he is milking every moment for it, and not in a bad way. You need to do something to stand out with it, and like that wedding scene, his clap, it's funny. You need just a beat there, and he delivers it. So no, I think he does a really good job.
Spike Lee's using him well. I love the moment also when he's struggling after the wedding. I actually liked this. We didn't talk about it, but after the wedding, you know, they have this beautiful moment getting wed on the beach, and then it's like any wedding, right? You see wedding photos, you always see the beauty of everyone posing and everything looking good, and wedding videos of everything looking amazing. You don't see the in-between moments to get those perfect shots. And I love the moment after the wedding when they're walking back up to the house. It's that awkwardness of, it's a pretty long walk. So you have the Reverend a few feet in front of Ganja and Hess, and then you have Rami Malek a few feet behind them struggling with the umbrella. And I just love that Lee included that.
You know, I know Lee juggles tones, and I love that. That's great. That's part of why we're talking so excited today. Would this movie have possibly succeeded more for you if it leaned into one? If it was more of it's a social satire with vampires, it's funny the whole way through, or if it leaned into the horror, because I feel like it's picking a lot of lanes, and sometimes that's fine. A lot of his movies, I like the juggling, would just have sticking with one direction help this
I absolutely believe it would have for me. Yeah. And that's what I mean by I was wrestling with how it all connects.
What scene would you show to someone to hook them?
I would show the fireside chat because it starts with Ganja mentioning how cold she is. And he basically just tells her, yeah, I've gotten used to it. I don't even think about it anymore. But then it delves into, again, like I mentioned before, him trying to figure out their destruction and how they can end these monsters that they've become and also reconciling with what they have become. I think that would gauge someone's interest who hasn't seen the movie.
Because the tones are all over the place, I don't know if this is cheating. I would go with the murder-suicide by Lafayette because I think it's what is happening here. Always, and then like that gunshot and then him like waking up. I think that's a cool visual. And I think that would get people to want to just know more about the story.
Yeah, that's a good pick too.
Okay, so what do you have for t-shirt quote?
I want you to live forever. I love it when Hess says that to her, just as he's turning her. But if you want to have another cool t-shirt, you got to know when it's all over from that song. Totally works as well.
Yeah, you've got to learn to let it go on the front of the shirt, and then you've got to know when it's all over on the back of the shirt.
Is that your pick?
Yes.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's such a great line. And again, I love that song. It's so catchy.
One line that I'm sad didn't get ported over from Ganja Hess is on the phone call where she's trying to come over. He's like, I'm going to send my driver over. And she's like, I'm in front of Pan American at the airport. The driver can't miss me because I'm that evil. I love that line. And also it's a very Ganja line. She's like pushing buttons. Like she likes asking inappropriate questions to people. And I get introducing her early. And Ganja and Hess are getting so used to the weird rhythm of the film. I don't hate that she's not in the first part because you're still getting your bearing. Right. Then once you got your bearing, now you introduce this other really dynamic character. I think that's an interesting, kind of dichotomy. Whether or not that works for you in any of these films, I get it, but it's there.
Now hearing that line, they absolutely should have used that into Sweet Blooded Jesus, just because her claiming to be evil, not knowing that he is this monster that is addicted to blood, is another level of humor that I think is awesome.
Are there any Oscars you would give this?
Rami Malek for his role as Seneschal for supporting.
He's won Best Actor. He's now going to win Best Supporting Actor. All right, I love it.
Talking about Oscars, I came across a Reddit comment about Spike Lee, and it says, it's so very American that his first and most recent Oscar nominations are for primal screams of what country we live in, and both years the Academy was like, but we solved the racism with Driving. They're talking about Driving Miss Daisy beating Malcolm X and Green Book beating Black Klansman for Best Picture.
Yep, that's a very astute observation.
I just loved that. What about you?
I would probably go production design. I think it's a very lived-in world. I think it's a lot of fun. And then I think that actually leads me into, we always like to end with a crew shout out. I went with Philippa Culpepper, who is the set decorator. And because I like the African art, how the interiors of the place, just like, again.
Yeah.
With it being such an independent production, I think it'd be easy to skimp on that, and his wealth and status and also appreciation of art. That's his character. And like, if that doesn't sing, it doesn't work. And again, he's also playing it a little bit more timid than the Ganja and Hess version. So I feel like the set design has to do even more heavy lifting to show kind of what kind of life he lives.
Yeah.
So I thought they did a really good job.
My crew shout out is for the production designer. And I was worried you were going to pick the same one. Yeah. But because of a lot of the same reasons you just mentioned, her name is Kay Lee, and some other projects she worked on. Most recently, she's done the production design for Freakier Friday, comes out 2025. And then she also did for the Nicole Kidman Destroyer, and then the HBO show Euphoria.
Some heavy hitters there.
Yeah, it's amazing. Spike Lee was able to get some talent. I'm so curious to see Highest to Lowest. I cannot wait.
Oh, I'm super psyched, Bob. Well, there was a lot to dive into today, so thank you for coming along with us. And Andreas, thank you for going in blind on this
Anytime. I do it for the listeners.
But seriously, if you're interested in any of this, all worth checking out. Of course, look up Spike Lee stuff, but look up Bill Gunn stuff. A fascinating life, fascinating project.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Real Demers. If you enjoyed what you heard, please support us by leaving a like, subscribe, or review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. You can find us on Blue Sky and Instagram. If you want to reach out to us and send a comment, you can email us at realdemers@gmail.com. Our music is by Adolfo Delanoy. You can check him out on Instagram at Adolfo Delanoy. Thanks again, and be safe.